So I started doing that with her, and then I got this stupid idea that I should sell it. And then I started selling it, and then the whole crowd of people that I was hanging out with me that were my so-called friends, the fun party friends, became these different friends, people that were doing meth, you know.
And those people Jesus.
were, you can't trust anybody
Right.
that you're selling meth to.
Hey everybody, we're here with Wren. Wren is my oldest, I don't mean that in age, okay? It's meaning he's a long-term best friend of mine. I've known you for years.
Yep.
I love you. You're such an amazing man. You're adored in the recovery community. So I'm so glad you're here today.
Thank you.
To share your story and hopefully spread some hope and inspire some people out there that are listening. So
I'm excited to be on here. I've been watching you in this space, and you've done an amazing job.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I'm excited to be on this show.
Yes, we're doing a good job.
Yes.
It's hard though. You know what I mean? Because it's like on one hand, it's great, but on the other hand, like it's scary. And like for me, because I've had to be completely vulnerable about my life on like every level in public.
I know.
And so for me, like parts of my story, like I wasn't really telling before, like the childhood stuff because of like, I was saying this the last episode too, because of like my mom seeing it and she's like my best friend and how is she going to be? So there's so much.
There's a lot of opening doors that you don't know how your loved ones are going to react, right?
Perceive it. And especially being in the adult industry.
Or friends in the recovery community. Because there's a lot of people in recovery community that will still have this like attitude. She did this or she did that or he did this or did that. And it's hard. It's really hard. But what I've always, I think, shared with you is like, the more we get vulnerable, the more that opens it up for people that really need help.
Absolutely. And that's what I've seen like firsthand doing this and like letting it all out. Like, especially with the adult stuff, it's like for so long, I like, unless someone asked me directly, I would keep it so hidden.
Right.
And I'm like, you know what? This like if I'm gonna do it, I gotta just disclose all of it because like I didn't know how people were gonna perceive me, if they were gonna judge me, and it's like, you know what, like we all have our stories, and we all have skeletons in the closet. Yes, mine are out there for everyone to see, but you know what, like I'm not gonna let that control me in any way anymore. And
you showed power. You showed taking that power back by doing that. I think by being a mom, right? And having an ex that you know how that went, and being able to be open and show the world like this was me and this is who I am now. You know what I mean? And owning that power. And it takes the power away from everybody else.
Exactly. Like it was like 1,000 pounds came off my shoulders. And I know you do the same. I mean, you're very vulnerable. Yeah. You've always made me feel safe in like conversations and talking about all this stuff. It's such a great quality of yours. And so I really want everyone to hear your story because it's just so inspiring as to like where you came from and how you are where you are today, because you do so much work in the community to help others. So let's just like take it back and just kind of walk through it. So starting from like your childhood. Yeah. Like, so what was your childhood like? So in the beginning, like I had a great childhood. Like my mom and dad are still married, you know, like I think over 55 years. That's so sweet. I know. And I had an older brother, and in the beginning, everything was great. Family was perfect. We went on trips. We were super spoiled. And your mom or dad, like no alcoholism in the family? No alcoholism in the family, like at least that I saw, and I still to this day have never seen it. Like, you know, they've drank, but they drink normally, right? And what I mean by normally is they'd have a couple glasses of wine and then call it quits. Or my dad would have a couple cocktails, and I only saw that when they had parties, like family Christmas party or Thanksgiving. Not just like at night watching TV. No, it wasn't like an everyday thing. So it was a very normal childhood as far as that goes. Now, I did have an older brother, and he looked a lot different than I did. Even different in per se how my dad looked versus how he looked. Like, but there was some resemblance with my mom, and I didn't know that at the time. I think when I was about 12, and because he was 4 years older than me, so he would have been, what, 15? 16. 16, yeah. That I started seeing
him having problems like with everything, like more irritable, angry.
He was just like that in general.
Yeah. Like would just go off the rails, and it got worse as he got older.
And so, was it mental? Like, what was it?
Well, hindsight now, being in the treatment industry, I think, and I'm not a doctor by any means, but I think he was undiagnosed as bipolar 1.
Okay, so he was undiagnosed and all this was happening. Yeah, okay.
And I didn't know that. So, but it was a different, like, I've seen different bipolar 1s, and this is where I'm not a doctor to say.
Yeah.
But he had a lot of anger built up in the way he responded and reacted to things. And at first it was like he would blow up at a teacher and then get called in teacher's conference, right? And to like getting in fights with people at school, to it got so bad that he got kicked out of high school. And he was very athletic. He was on the surf team, baseball team, and dominated in those activities. But he just got more and more angrier and more violent.
Was it kind of like when he started hitting puberty? Like he changed?
Yeah. And he got scary. Like he was very very animated with how he got angry. So he'd always invade your space, foam at the mouth.
And you're in the same house while he's doing this. Okay, yeah.
To my mom, to me. My dad started working nights. He was a longshoreman, so my dad wasn't home in the evenings. And so it was me getting the bulk of it, or my mom, right? And my mom is very short, and I'm short too, but I would always feel like I had to protect my mom and jump in the middle of him foaming at the mouth, screaming, "I'm going to murder you," you know what I mean? And getting in her face and pushing her, right? To where I would get in and try to protect her, and then he would fight me and beat the shit out of me. And that started happening quite a bit. And it was like, we're going to family therapy now all of a sudden, you know, trying to figure out. And even back then, like, no one even had him go see a psychiatrist. Wow. It was weird. And this is like, you know, I don't want to show my age.
Like the 90s.
Yeah, it was like in the 90s. It was
around then.
It was a long time for that, but
okay, the late 80s. Let's just go with that.
So then he got kicked out, went to like a boarding school, you know, for teens.
Was he at all like aware and would say like a typical abuser, you know, not saying he was an abuser, but somebody that's like an abuser, it's like they do this thing and then they're like, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." Would that happen?
Yeah. So he would go from complete rage to either that day or the next day, crying, emotional, telling us he loved us, he's so sorry, he can't believe he was like that.
That roller coaster.
Yeah, and that he, you know, he wants to know that he's safe around me and all these things.
Yeah.
After I have black eyes and bruises.
So super confusing for you.
Super confusing, right? And I was like 12.
Yeah.
And so it was still going on. So I started taking like martial arts, like learning how to defend myself. And still, no matter what, I would always get my ass kicked because he was just a bigger guy, you know, and really scary because, and as I got older, like he was more intimidating because of how he acted emotionally, like in rage and foaming at the mouth and like saying things like, "I'm going to murder you." You know what I mean? Like, to where you're like, holy fuck, this guy's going to kill me.
Yeah.
To a point where, like, you know, he's bashed my head into the ground. I've gotten stitches.
Major trauma.
I ran from him and swung a door shut and it cracked him in the head. And then he was like looking, and I got so scared I didn't come back to the house for 3 days because he was telling me he's going to murder me. There was even a point where like, he was like screaming, you know, he's going to kill me, and bashed my head in. And then my friend luckily came over at that time and jumped on him. And then he fought me and my friend. And then he chased me into the kitchen screaming he's going to murder me, to me stabbing him with a knife.
Whoa.
In his leg. And it got out of hand. And then as things were happening, my brother had a drug problem. Like he was smoking pot all the time, doing cocaine. And I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna sell him weed. I can get it for my friend, and I'm going to see how this goes. And I started selling him weed. And once I did that, like I had this control over him because he was always like asking me, hey, you got the weed? And, so
you're in like survivor mode. Like, how can I like take control of this situation?
And it became this like thing, like, holy shit, like for the first time. And now I'm probably like 17 and he's, 4 years older, whatever that is. And like, he is asking me, what can he do for me? And how can he, and then trying to barter with me when he doesn't have money. But for the first time, I felt power.
Yeah.
I felt that I had power.
Liked that.
I liked it a lot. And that fueled into my ego, right? And then all of a sudden, I started selling drugs to
And you're
him.
not using them at the time.
I'm not using them at all.
Okay.
I'm selling him now marijuana, and I'm selling him cocaine, mushrooms, like whatever. I started being his drug dealer, right?
Wow.
And then from there, I just started selling drugs to everybody that was his friends. And that's how it started out.
Wow.
And I had power over all these guys. And they're all older than me, you know what I mean? And for the first time, I just felt like, holy shit, like I have total control.
Yeah, you're not going to hurt me.
No.
I got you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that led into me selling drugs and expanding into the community.
Like all over Orange County, because you're from Orange County, right? Yeah.
To where I was like moving like I don't know, 30 pounds of weed every other day.
That's a lot.
To selling like 5,000 X tabs a week.
And you're not using it all.
No.
So what was the driving force, like that final thing that you were like, you know what, I'm going to try this?
Well, as I started expanding into the different drugs, right, I was also becoming in my younger 20s, and we were going to back then, like in LA, there was all these clubs, you know, they called them, they weren't even raves at that point. They were just clubs that
like
had
underground clubs,
clubs, right? And I became the known person in LA to get ecstasy from. And so I started taking ecstasy going to these clubs, and that's where it started, right? And ecstasy ran into smoking pot, and that ran into cocaine. Yeah. But it was, to me, it was manageable for a while. Right?
Like you didn't think like, oh, I shouldn't be doing this. You're just like, whatever, I'm partying.
Yeah, I'm just having fun.
Yeah.
I'm just having a good time. I'm going to all these like after hour clubs and meeting all these people in LA. It was like, to me, it was like, wow, like, I was having a great time.
Yeah.
And I was making a lot of money.
Sounds like it was good while it was good.
It was good, yeah. And it was funny, I've always had my own businesses. So at the time, I had a valet lot, started at 18. I was working valet restaurants, or, Rusty Pelican,
I love that restaurant.
Villanova, which is now the winery? It's
the winery, yeah.
I had Conos, and now it's like a fashion store, but it was on the water. So I was working in these valet lots, and then I started my own valet company, and I took over those accounts. And for me, it was great. Like, people would want drugs, they would come in and they would ask me like, hey, can I get so-and-so? And I'd be like, yeah, just come and valet the car, come in and get a drink, and I'll leave it in the ashtray and leave the money in the ashtray. And so I had all my valets selling drugs for me.
It sounds like you're almost addicted to that lifestyle. That's how it kind of started.
I became very addicted.
Yeah.
Very addicted to the lifestyle.
Yeah.
And I thought I was like this young Tony Montana rising up.
Sounds like it.
in California. And it was crazy. I started having a lot of people work for me, selling drugs and moving the drugs for me. And that was all fueling my ego, though, my ego, like, oh, I want more. And it came to a point where maybe 15, 18 years into it.
15, 18 years, you did that for that long?
Yeah.
Okay.
Probably longer.
So that's a long run of doing that.
So it went from the valet business to, I opened a produce company, and I was selling produce to like all the Mexican restaurants here in Orange County. Like Wahoo's Fish Taco is my biggest account, but I had El Madres, I had El Ranchitos, I had every Mexican restaurant that bought tomatoes, because my friend's family is one of the biggest tomato packers in the West Coast of the United States, and they helped me. But that for me was an easy front for me, because I could write off 80% of my inventory. So I'd buy produce with cash from the drugs, and then I would invoice people at the restaurants, and they'd pay me by check. And so I was like actually cleaning my money.
Yeah.
It was a perfect front. But long story short, what happened is I met a girl, and she was a bartender at a strip bar.
There's always a girl.
I know. Always.
I was waiting for it. Here she comes, you guys.
Right? And she introduced me to methamphetamines.
Oof. So up until then, you weren't selling meth. You'd never tried it.
Didn't want to, because that was a bad drug.
Right.
In the community,
that's the dirty
right?
one.
Oof. I wanted to be the guy that had all the fun drugs. You know, I didn't want to label myself as like selling meth.
Yeah.
Right? But she introduced me.
And how old were you?
I was probably at the time 27, 28 years old. And I met her, and obviously I was getting out of a relationship, and I was in a relationship during that time. This is the sad thing, is I was in a relationship at that time, loved the girl, but I wasn't completely in love with her. I was starting to party too much, and I told myself I need to like stop, right? And I thought by having a girlfriend that was a total normie, never been introduced to drugs, that I would mellow out.
She'll make it happen.
Yeah. So I did it, and it did at first, but then I introduced her to the drugs, and then she got addicted to cocaine and was stealing cocaine from me. And it came to a point where it got so bad that both of us made a pact that we were going to quit, and we tried to get sober on our own, not going through recovery at all. And we did it for like a year, and then our relationship wasn't working out. You know, hindsight, looking back at it now, there was a lot of things I still need to work on. There was a lot of trauma in her life that she wasn't working on, and it just wasn't, we weren't like, it wasn't working.
Yeah.
So I would go to the strip bar and have drinks at this bar, and then tell all my problems to the bartender. And then, you know, she was going through the same thing, and that's who I ended up meeting and introduced me to meth. And then the sex was great, obviously, you know, and it was like some drug I've never done. And I was like, oh my God, this is perfect, because I'm already hyper as it is. And I think that made me focus more in the beginning to do more things. And so it worked in the beginning, but then quickly, and I mean quickly, it's probably the only drug that I've ever done that's really ruined my life within like a 3-year period.
I feel like everybody says that too, if not even sooner, where they're like, I was doing this, and not that they had a good life, but they're at least kind of maintaining. And then they introduce meth or, you know, heroin, like IV drugs. And then it's like, forget it.
It literally sucked the life out of me.
So what happened exactly?
So I started doing that with her. And then I got this stupid idea that I should sell it. And then I started selling it. And then the whole crowd of people that I was hanging out with me, that were my so-called friends, the fun party friends, became these different friends, people that were doing meth, you know.
And those people
Jesus. Were, you can't trust anybody that you're selling meth to. And they'll steal shit from you and then help you look for it.
Right.
Those are the type of friends that
so now you're probably like carrying a gun and worried for your safety.
So then you're not sleeping, like you're not having good 7-8 hour night sleeps. You're like having cat naps 2 or 3 hours here and there. And so what happens to your mind is really, it's not the drug itself, it's having sleep deprivation.
Yep.
And that causes, and this is how a lot of mental health probably has happened is, you know, especially if people's brains, they're not all wired the same, and it could affect somebody a lot quicker than that. But what was happening is I was getting really paranoid. And I had weapons all over throughout my house. I had, you know, video cameras set up all around my house.
Yeah. That extreme paranoia, I feel like that's like a common denominator when you talk to people with their stories. Because even just for me doing Adderall, you know, and I thought, oh, I'm going to do the good one. It's Adderall. Yeah. But it'd be the same thing, because all of a sudden now I'm up for a week and I'm paranoid and I think people are after me, and then I end up on a 5150 hold. So like, I wonder what that is. I've never actually looked into it in meth that produces that, or if it's just from sleep deprivation.
I honestly think it's from the sleep deprivation. It's your brain, like your brain needs to go into like a homeostate of resting for a period of time for us to be, for it to function well throughout the day, I think, honestly. But I mean, again, I'm not a doctor. That'd be interesting to know. But what happened is, long story short, there's so many things that happened in between, but the cops started investigating me for another friend that I had that was one of the biggest meth distributors at the time in Hawaii. And he was moving a lot of weight of meth over there. And I wasn't his partner, but I was his best friend, and we were hanging out, and I was doing my own selling drugs, and I had never done meth, and he had been making meth and selling meth. He was buying crank, cleaning it up, selling it over to Hawaii, calling it ice, right? And he became really big in that industry, but it came to a point where, like, I was down and out one time, and he came to me and offered me a quick $1,000 to go buy this like machine that spun the Bunsen burner, like to make methamphetamines. And he's like, listen, he's like, they're going to ask for your ID because the only people buying this machine is either making high octane gasoline for racing or they're a pharmacist. So you got to be one of the two. So you have to show your ID. The FBI, the detectives probably in 2 months will come and ask you, and they'll ask to look at your house. But if you're not selling methamphetamines, you're fine. And I'm like, I was hard up, and he wanted to pay me like X amount of dollars, and I needed the money to like, whatever, it was just in a bad situation where I made that decision. And so I did that. 2 months later, I got a knock on my door, and it was the police. Now, I grew up with my dad's best friends were detectives, right? And one was LA homicide, and the other one was Huntington Beach, detective for like drugs or related, something like that. And then they retired, and then their sons followed in their footsteps. So his son was at my door knocking, but his partner was at the door knocking, and he was back on the driveway, and he didn't want to come up because of the relationship he had with me. He could not like alter what I may say or may not because he was there. So I saw him, and I'm asking him, I'm like, hey, Brian, what's going on? He's like, hey, man, you bought something, like, we need to, and it's illegal to buy unless you're a pharmacist or, you own a race car company. And so we need to come and check out your house, make sure you're not making methamphetamines.
Yeah.
And so it was funny. It was like, and I could go into, there's so much more going on in that house at that time when they showed up that I could have been, if they had known to search my house thoroughly, I would have been in prison for a long time. Yeah. So I had drugs in that house.
Just hidden well.
But they were looking for a lab. And so when they came in, they just wanted to look in all the rooms, see if there's any Bunsen burners and machines mixing high octane fuel to make, or, whatever you do to make methamphetamines or in the garage. So they just kind of checked and then said, hey, just so you know, like, this is like Brian said to me, and he was the son of my dad's best friends. And he said to me, he's like, hey, you're on a list now. And so if your name keeps coming across my desk, you and I are going to be running into each other, and it's never going to be good for you if I have to keep coming back here. And that scared me. Right. So I like waited a couple days and went over and told my friend, hey, they asked for a name. I didn't say anything, but they're looking for this guy, and his nickname on the streets is this. And I'm not going to say the name because
no, let's not do that.
But his nickname is this. And so there was two guys that had nicknames of the same, and they ended up going to this other guy's house and raided him and caught him. But the nickname that they had was my buddy. So they got it wrong. So my buddy did shut down for a little bit, but only for a small time. And he didn't think he was going to get in trouble. And then he was smart enough. Long story short, he ended up a couple years later, got caught and was looking at 25 years to life, and had to do 12 years in prison, federal prison. I then had stopped for a little bit. And then I was in the mortgage business now at this time, making a lot of money, didn't need to be selling drugs. But again, here's my ego, right? I'm trying to buy drugs on the streets just to have fun. And these guys are charging me full price. Now, mind you, the guys I'm buying drugs from are the guys that I hooked up with all my contacts. So I'm like, you got to give me your best deal, or you wouldn't be making the money you're making without me. Yeah. So I got mad. And so I'm like, fuck this. So I went and started buying pounds of meth and cocaine and ecstasy, just so I could have enough for myself. And then I let people distribute it for me. Mm-hmm. I didn't even care really to make the money, but I was being dumb and having it at my house. And I was never like that before, but I was doing meth too. So I was making bad decisions. Yeah. And anyways, one thing led to another. The cops came and raided my house, and I was already on probation and wasn't allowed to have any firearms or weapons. And I had multiple weapons and firearms in my house. So they got me for that. They found a lot of stuff, not as much as they wanted to find, but they basically arrested me and said I was going to do 7 years in prison. So I went to jail. And there's so many other things I've left out, but I went to jail.
That's okay.
Yeah, I went to jail, and I was fighting my case in jail, and it looked like I was going to do 7 years. So I was in jail for a year. County year in jail in Orange County is 9 months. So in 9 months, if you hadn't finished your case, they ship you off anyways to prison, either Wasco or Chino. So I was getting ready to be shipped off because I had to do a full year, 12 months, and not 9. And I was petrified, and my friend was writing me letters from federal prison telling me, you don't want to go down this road. This is what shit that happens, and jail's nothing like prison. And, I was kind of getting scared. Like, I'm not ready to go to prison. I'm not built for prison. But in jail, I started having to make decisions to thinking that I was going to do prison, and then I had to start doing things in jail just so I have a name for myself. So if I do go to prison, I could be kind of protected. Mm-hmm. But anyways, on the 9 months, my lawyer, which I spent over $70,000, my lawyer was able to get the gun charge dropped, and then stick me with, possession of narcotics, intent to sell, and multiple weapons, right? But those were enough to where if I got the gun drop from the drugs, then they would move me to the farm in Irvine, and I can finish 3 months there and then be on probation for 3 years. But if I had to sign a joint suspension saying if I fucked up on probation, that I'd lose that whole year and do all 7 years in prison. Yeah. But I was so scared to go to prison. I did that deal. I got out. My dad had called a buddy of his, a mechanic that was sober and knew the person had a sober living, and he moved me in there. And for the first time in my life, because there's so many times that I told my mom and dad, like, I promise I'm going to be better and I'm going to do this. And my mom and dad always gave me another chance, right? So subconsciously, like, even though I wanted to do good, I still wasn't, my stinking thinking wasn't corrected yet, right? And so this time, my dad's like, I'm paying for 2 weeks in sober living. If you can't get a job and pay your own way, it was $120 a week. You can't pay your own way. You're on your own. You're dead to me. Fix your life. Never contact me again. Wow. And it was pretty, like, it hit home because for the first time. That's what you needed. Yeah, and for the first time, I knew he wasn't, like, he was serious. Yeah. Like, there wasn't no, I'm sorry, I'll do better. It was like, this is it, or you're fucking going to be homeless. And I was smarter than that too. Like, I'm like, fuck, So anyways, I got dropped off in the sober living, and that was 16 years ago. May 22nd, I'll have 17 years. Wow. So unbelievable. Yeah. So, like, congratulations, first of all. Yeah. Well, and this is the thing is, like, for sober living, like, if I was going to move out a year into sober living, and I was like, I don't know if I'm still having crooked thinking. Like, I was still, like, my way of thinking for everybody was like, I'll be your friend if you have something to give me. Yeah. In my head. Like, because you were just so conditioned with that for so long. Like, if like, it had to be an angle. Like for you to be my friend, like what can you provide for me to want to be your friend? That's how I thought.
Yeah. It probably goes back to obviously with you and your brother.
Right.
Yeah.
Now hindsight looking at that. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. And that's trauma that I didn't even know that I had, you know what I mean? And it helped me be a survivor up until, you know, I got sober, but then like it wasn't working for me anymore. And it's still like, I'm still working on being better version of myself because the split second, like it's the split second, like way you think, and you could make a bad decision by the way you're thinking. You know what I mean?
And I love that you say that because here you are with almost, you know, going on 17 years of recovery and you're still working on those things. Yeah. Because it's a work in progress.
Oh, it is. I thought like I worked on almost everything, every aspect in my life. And then I realized like in relationships, like even in relationships, I still have so much to work on. Whether that's me, whether that's me picking the right person or allowing myself to give it a chance with the right person, and that they're healed in their way, or they're willing at least to work on themselves in their way, and that you both can communicate that without blowing. Like even if you blow up, right? Then you come back to each other and say, you know what, I could have been better at this, and they say the same thing. I could have been better at this, and we need to be able to walk through that, right? Yeah.
So when you were in sober living, how long did you stay there for?
So at a year, I was going to move out, but my probation was for 3 years. And I'm like, no accountability. I still am thinking sometimes crooked, like maybe I should stay a little longer. And then the awesome thing is management position opened up. They offered me to be the house manager, and I didn't have to pay rent. And I'm like, oh, this is perfect. And so I stayed another 2 years.
Wow.
So I finished probation, and then I stayed probably another almost a year after that.
So do you strongly suggest like sober living to guys, you know, coming out of the system like you were, you know, trying to get sober for, you know, for all these reasons? Like what would you tell somebody right now that's like debating going to sober living and they're just like newly sober? Like what were the benefits for you that you got out of it?
The benefits for me is it gave me an opportunity to really work on myself and change my thought process. That I don't have to have a friend. I don't have to have an angle on somebody for them to be my friend. Like if I'm open, loving, compassionate, and they just know my vulnerable side and they still are sticking with me, that's a good friend to have, you know, and they'll do anything for you, and hopefully you'll do anything for them, you know. I used to not think that way. So I think, and everyone's different, but it took me some time to change the way I thought about people. And that was from trauma.
Yeah. Like, and did you go to therapy or do any sort of like program?
No, I went to therapy. I was just actually lived in sober living, and that sober living had very strict rules. So I didn't go to treatment. I went to sober living, but I got in the middle of the pack of those people, and we went to meetings every day. I got a sponsor. I actively worked the steps. The steps actually started making me really think differently than the way I always thought before. And then when I started sponsoring people and going through the steps, each time I did that, I was helping me realize more things in those steps that I didn't even think about for myself. And slowly over time, sponsoring other people, that changed my perception. Now, didn't completely heal me of the trauma. I'm going to therapy now after 16 years, like, and I'm really trying to work on myself. Like, and there's still a lot of things, like, just like I'm saying, like you have a split second, your mind reacts to something, and then you have this perception of how you should react or what you do to react. And it's not always the healthiest way. Yeah. And so I'm learning that now. Like I may be perfect in the recovery community, but as far as like evolving and being completely 100% healed, I'm not there yet.
Yeah. And I love that you said that, because I've experienced that firsthand with myself and other people too, where it's like, you can work this program, you know, you can get up and do all these things every day that you need to do and go to these meetings and do all of that. And that's great. But it's like, unless you're doing the work on the inside, like you're kind of on autopilot doing all these things.
Yeah. And it's hard because you have to be vulnerable and open up to someone and them really know who you are, whether it be a therapist or not. And that therapist give you advice and you trust that therapist, right? To the advice, or at least make you look at things differently than how you look at them right away. And
seeing those different point of views, being able to step back. Like, when do you feel that you started to gain like that self-awareness?
In the really the past 2 relationships I've been in, I think
they were very teachable for you.
Yeah. And so it made me go, wow, I really need to be able to have someone help me look into the decisions I make for relationships and why I'm making those decisions.
Yeah.
Like, and then if I choose to make those decisions, to make sure that I'm making the right decision for them and for myself.
Right. Because for so long, like, I'd be like, God, I just have horrible luck in relationships, or God, like my picker's off or whatever. And it's like, no, stupid. There's obviously something going on inside you that's having you seek these things out subconsciously. And it's really like nothing wrong per se that the other person's doing, but you're just completely different in how you see love, accept love, give love, like all those different things and where you're at in your life. We're all on like such different journeys.
Right. Yeah.
And so, like starting to get that self-awareness to really see your part in things and why you do the things you do, especially if it's becoming a cycle. Yeah. Yeah.
Mine's definitely, becoming a cycle. And it's like, even after 16 years of sobriety, it's like, oh, I see the signs and I'm like, I probably shouldn't do that. But then I'm like, part of my brain goes, but you can just love them and show them that you could be the right person for them.
Yeah. When in all reality, you shouldn't have to do that.
I shouldn't have to do that.
Yeah.
And that'll either push them away, or that'll be like, they're not willing to work on themselves, so they're not going to change. So you shouldn't have to show them that. Right. And that's where I'm at fault. Like, cause I knew, especially in the past relationship, I'm like, there's a lot of red flags.
Yeah.
But I'm still going to show, because love always wins, right? But it's good to have love, but
to a fault.
To a fault.
Yeah. And I think for both me and you, because of our family dynamics as children, it was so impactful with how our lives played out.
Oh yeah.
You know, and so like I had the trauma as a child too, you know, different, but the way that I like chose people and the way I showed myself to people ever since then, until I really did the right work. Yeah. It was all wrong. Yeah. And it all stemmed from that. Yeah. And it really shows you, because people will have this trauma and they'll like push it down. They don't want to talk about it. Everything's fine. I'm over it. But then if you like really take a look inside and like see how your life is and the relationships you're in and how you feel when you're at home at night and all, like those are the things to really look at.
Yeah. Absolutely. And so, so I went back to therapy, and I'm hopefully, exploring and learning new things, so I don't keep making, decisions that are going to really, they impact you and hurt you later on, you know, or that other person or the both of you. So
what do you think over the last 2 years of going to therapy has been the most like aha moment that you've had about yourself?
I think the most aha moment for me is like, why, like, cause I have a lot of love to give. Right. But like you said, like I shouldn't have to go over and above and beyond loving somebody, with hoping that's going to fix them.
So you're an overgiver. Like
yeah. And I think if they're working on themselves, right, and they love you for who you are, then you don't have to go over the top. I think that's the biggest thing for me that I've learned.
And I feel like guys in relationships, they're more likely to kind of hold back on how they're feeling longer than the females. And, I mean, that's just the way it is. Yeah. Like what would you say to guys out there listening right now that are going through a tough relationship and they don't really know how to like express themselves emotionally?
honestly, I think they should go to therapy and find a therapist that they can trust and be vulnerable and really open up to the therapist so that and I would, and this is just me, I picked a female therapist because I wanted a female's perspective, right? And I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but for me, I think it's better to hear it coming from a female than a man, because I think men we're built differently.
Yeah.
And we act differently. So I needed more. I would trust a female giving me the advice because she's a female and maybe she would be like, no, this is what she's thinking, or, so I think honestly, I think therapy is huge.
Yeah.
I think talking about it more and more and opening up and really finding out, like for me, the trauma, like great. I knew that I had the trauma, but I never really worked on these walls. See, like when we grow up, we build these walls, right? And that protects us and makes us strong in who we are as a warrior in recovery, right?
Yeah.
We're a warrior in recovery, but those walls are now not doing anything to help us anymore at this point. So the walls need to come down, and we need to take a look at why those walls came up and what trauma we're protecting ourselves of, and then be able to talk about that trauma and then go, oh, that's why I made that decision.
Exactly.
That's why I'm doing that.
Yeah. So above, the relationships and, learning about yourself through this recovery process, where along that road did you find your passion and purpose to work in this space and help people in recovery?
Well, so when I became the house manager, like I just really enjoyed, I really enjoyed like making sure everyone was happy and we were doing things together. And then having little mini miracles happen. Like when the mini miracles started happening in my life, like cleaning up the wreckage, getting a better job, getting a promotion, talking to families, and then having the mini miracles happen in their son's life or daughter's life. Those were like the little mini wins for me. It was a beautiful thing to see because I saw it in me with my mom and dad, my aunt and uncle, all the people that kind of, pushed me away because of who I became. I got them all back in my life, and that was so important to me, family. And then when I'm helping other clients in the house and how little miracles were happening with them, like it was just good to see that. And it gave me like goosebumps, right? So I didn't know yet then that I wanted to work in treatment, but my friend, or a very close friend that I've known my whole life, she's an interventionist and has had a company for 30 years.
You can say them because I love them.
Hired Power, yes. Nanette Zumwalt and Marnie.
Hi, guys.
Yeah.
We love you.
We love you. And her brother was one of my best friends that was in prison doing, 25 years of life. And she knew that I was close to him and he was going to be getting out soon. And she just wanted me around and make sure that I was in his life. And so she kind of started like grooming me, right, to continue down this path and work in recovery. And so she offered me a job to be, at first it was a sober companion. She calls them personal recovery assistants. And to actually do safe passages for the people she was doing interventions for and that were decided to go to treatment. So I started doing that with her and flying people to different facilities that she recommended with the family. And I just totally loved it. And then it became like where I started working with clients after treatment, living with them, for like 30 days, sometimes 60 days, taking them to finding meetings around their area, whatever town they lived in, right? I'd live with them and find meetings in the area, help them get with a sponsor, help them with their daily chores or going back to work, being their assistant, kind of like an executive assistant. Yeah. Because some of the people were well off. It was just a really cool thing to see. And really we were just trying to show them how you can have fun in sobriety. So I really loved that. And that led into me having a client at a treatment facility for like 90 days. And I was living with him at the treatment facility because he would not get out of bed and go to groups. But his family was like, we're talking
wealthy,
beyond wealthy.
Yeah.
Like, he grew up, with maids and butlers and nannies, and those were his parents, really.
And so you lived with him in treatment?
I lived with him,
yeah.
help him get up, learn how to make breakfast because he never did it, and get him off Nutella chocolate and toast because that's all he ate when he didn't have the nanny or the butler or the maid around or the chef.
Yeah.
And really start to get him exercising because he was overweight, and you really get him into groups so he would do the therapy. And so that was a challenge at first, but then he really loved me, and I got him to start playing tennis, and I found something that he really enjoyed. And then it was like, and then he was losing weight. It was really cool to see.
Yeah.
And the treatment center at the time had offered me a position there. And I decided to take it. So that was like my first experience.
Yeah. And since then you've worked, without going into every detail of it, you've worked in the treatment space for over a decade. Yeah. Right? Yeah. You've been a program director, clinical director?
No. So I started out as like a detox tech, and then that moved up to managing the detox and to operations, where I was quality control director, basically overseeing all the houses that the clients lived in. And then and then I moved into, and then I got my KDAC too, because of Nanette. She wanted me to get certified, and I'm good. I did. So I knew if I'm going to be a program director, like, you know what I mean, what groups should be done and how they should be done. And it was really good for me to do. So I went on and got my license for that. And then I became a program director for a program and I ran it for 8 years. And then I did business development, and I did it with you back in the day.
Which was a totally different thing.
Totally different thing, but super fun.
Yeah, exactly. And for the last several years, you've also have owned and operated sober living homes.
Yeah, so...
And still do.
Hindsight, like back then when I moved out of the sober living, I ended up becoming business partners with the owner of that sober living, and we bought another house together, and then he just kind of incorporated me into be business partners for both houses. Yeah. And then you and I opened up a house. We had a women's house for a while, and then from then I kind of branched off on my own, and now I have Higher Purpose Recovery.
Yeah. So Higher Purpose Recovery is your sober livings that are men's houses currently.
Yes.
And they're in the Orange County area.
Yep.
Okay. And you have a new venture.
Yes, I do. So my plan first is to open up 3 more houses this year, sober livings, 2 more men's house and another women's house. And I'm about to launch a mental health virtual outpatient program.
I love that.
And the reason I did it really is because I saw a huge gap. Like most of the facilities around here, because of return on investment, they stop at billing at IOP, which is intensive outpatient. So then they refer them out to a sober living, and somehow between the shuffle of moving into a sober living, they lose the referrals of the therapist or the doctor they're supposed to see to continue getting their meds. And really then it's up to the sober living to say, hey, this is the structure. You got to go to a meeting every day. You got to get a sponsor. And some of them, I want to be able to have options for everybody to where if AA is not their thing yet, eventually they'll find it. But if it's not their thing yet, to have some self-help support groups.
Yeah.
And so usually when they move out, what happens is they move out, they're out of IOP, they move into sober living. Sober living in Orange County now has become expensive. Their parents are writing them to hurry up and get a job, a full-time job, and start taking over the financials because they're done and tired of paying thousands of dollars for treatment and thousands of dollars now for sober living. So there's a lot of stress for them going from IOP and moving into a sober living, right? So my whole goal in the beginning was I want to lighten that stress. And how I can lighten that stress is by offering them outpatient 2 hours a week in the evenings so they can still get a job during the day and still see a therapist because they still need to work on it. Yeah. Like, look, I have had 16 years sober, and if I still need to work on myself...
Everybody does.
Everybody does. Yeah, everybody does. I mean, people even not in recovery.
That's what I mean. Everybody should do therapy at some point.
So with that... offering those and then having a doctor in case they don't have the referral, the treatment center is not calling you back with the referrals they gave, that we will have a psychiatrist on staff that can see them and prescribe meds to continue on the medications that were working for them or adjust their meds.
And they can do this from their home or from the sober living through virtual IOP.
Yeah, so they can do that virtual. And then if they do that and they're really struggling financially, I might be able to offset their costs to help their family or them so they're not so stressed out and don't have to feel like they're being pressured to get a full-time job. I just want them to get a part-time job.
Yeah.
Part-time job to kind of get back in the swing of things, not too much stress. They're making a little money. They feel self-worth.
Yeah.
Right? But they have enough time to work on themselves still.
Yeah. I love that you're doing that. Like you have the experience in doing this yourself, right? Yeah. And then working in this space for so many years. Right. And you're absolutely right with that gap. Like there's that gap where it's like, okay, what is this person supposed to do now?
Yeah.
Because it doesn't just get better after 90 days or even less. Like it's a work in progress for a very long time. And at least that like first year is so important to like get that foundation, be seeing the doctor, figure out what recovery looks like for you.
Yeah.
So I love that.
Thank you.
I want to ask you a couple of questions, but first, while we're on this topic, so anybody out there that wants to know more about your sober living or the higher purpose outpatient virtual, where can they get a hold of you personally, or do you have Instagram pages, websites, anything like that?
Yeah, so I have all of it. I have a website called higherpurposerecovery.com. That's my sober living. It has my phone number on there. You can read all about the rules and what I require for them to be at my sober livings. Okay. I'm about to have a new website for our virtual outpatient. That's going to be Higher Purpose Recovery, but the initials HPR, outpatient.com.
Okay.
And you'll be able to do virtual through that like website, a portal. And that will be hopefully ready by next month.
Okay.
And then I'm going to offer it obviously to more than people in just my sober livings, all the sober livings around here in Orange County, go to all the facilities that we have a relationship with and say, hey, if they need housing or they don't need housing and they're in the state of California, please think of us and we can offer outpatient. And our outpatient is going to be, this is the other thing too, it's not going to be substance abuse. And most of the clients, they go into treatment for substance abuse, but there's always an underlying mental health issue. We may have trauma, like all of us have probably trauma, PTSD, anxiety, all these things. So the groups are going to be tailored towards mental health only. So because when they're in treatment, they're learning about ways to not pick up and use, right? And those are a lot of the groups. So now we're going to be talking about more, how do you deal with your anxiety? What tool do you use for your trauma, like when this happens?
Yeah.
So I partnered up with someone that I've known for over 10 years. He's been a family marriage therapist for probably 12 years, clinical director for the last 7 years, has worked at some pretty well-known places. His name's Costa Condoas. And so he's going to be putting together we're going to go all out and pick very seasoned therapists that really know how to keep the clients engaged and pay them well. Because we don't want them leaving.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's okay. Because I want them to actually get something out of the groups,
Yeah. So people can find you in those places, whether they want to seek out employment or if they're looking for treatment or if they're looking for sober living.
Yep.
Okay. A couple questions I want to ask you personally before we wrap up. Number one, for someone that's out there, you can look in that camera or you can just look at me. But if there's a guy looking through there right now, that was your younger self pretty much, and he needs to get sober and he's got 1 foot in and 1 foot out, what would you tell him in your conversation?
Wow. I mean, it's funny. You can tell people everything, but if it was me talking to me, right, I say, please don't go through and learn the hard way. Ask for help. Don't be afraid to be vulnerable, because as soon as you ask for help, most likely they're going to be vulnerable with you and help you as much as they can. And then I hope that you do, because nowadays it's like everything's cut with fentanyl, and fentanyl just is killing everybody.
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't like in the 80s where it was just real cocaine and real ecstasy, and that was still bad, but now everything's laced with fentanyl and you don't know what you're getting your hands into. Like, you literally need a test kit to test your drugs and make sure you're not going to die if you decide to do a drug. And that's a horrible way to live.
Yeah.
And it just, all it does is stunt your growth and slow you down from what you really, really want. And that's probably to have a family, kids, and raise them and have, you know what I mean? And have a good life.
Yeah.
You know? You can have such a good life without drugs and alcohol. And it takes a minute to find yourself, but once you do, man, the sky's the limit. You can do everything that you always talk about doing and never do it, but now you can actually do it. And it's just a beautiful thing.
I love it.
Yeah.
Okay, last question.
Yep.
Forgiveness. A lot of people struggle with forgiveness, guilt and shame for others and themselves. You went through a lot in your life, you know, between relationships, your brother, you know, people you're dealing to and with, you know, your girlfriends. Like, how did that process look like for you, forgiving others and forgiving yourself?
How did that process look?
How'd you learn how to do it?
Still, I think I'm still learning.
Okay.
But like the biggest thing is like, you know, I always say it takes three. Like, you know, it's that party, yourself, and in the truth in the middle. And I just believe that, like, I forgive whoever was on the other side of that end of, like, my brother. Like, I forgive you, Terry, you know, or any relationship I have, I forgive you. And I forgive myself for doing all the things that I did. Like, you know, like, I wasn't an angel in a lot of it. So, you know, I'm truly sorry for that. And really the most important thing is I forgive myself. Because the biggest thing, the hardest thing was for me was to forgive myself. Right. And, I really need to forgive myself for the things that I did.
Yeah. Same. I'm the same way. Like, that was the hardest thing, was not the other people. I mean, that's tough. And I still struggle with a little bit of it, but with myself, especially to do with like my son.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh my God, you know, but once I was able to do that, like, life just became so much better, you know, and like recovery just looked so much better long-term for me, because I wasn't sitting in that stuff where I was kind of like, ugh, I don't want to feel this, but I need to feel it, you know? So
that's so true, because it's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard, you know? It's funny you say that. I think most of us have a hard time forgiving ourselves. Right?
I hear it all the time.
Yeah.
That's like one of the hardest things.
Yeah.
So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me on here.
Thank you. And thanks for everything you're doing in the community.
Thank you.
Best of luck with your future endeavors.
Thank you.
And I'm just so proud to call you my friend. So
thank you.
All right, you guys, we'll see you next time. Bye.